We can't change the past, but the past can change us for generations.
To realize the capability of humanity to turn into the most vicious creatures on this earth. We have that built in to us.
Bill Kugelman is 98 years old, but he vividly remembers life as a teenager in Poland when Nazis tore him from his home and condemned him to the concentration camps, smoking dried leaves to tame ravaging hunger and growing numb from the beatings and the fear. Kugelman believed he'd never see freedom again.
You just did not react to things anymore. What? It's just like you beat a dead horse. That was it.
Kugelman says even 80 years later, he can't bring himself to give a full description of life and death in the concentration camps. And to those closest to that kind of pain, it's their history too, even if they didn't live it.
Children of trauma survivors have an experiential knowledge of their parents' trauma, of experiences that they never actually lived through.
Dr. Irit Felsen, a psychologist who specializes in Holocaust-related trauma, knows this subject on a deeper level. Both her parents were survivors, making her a 2G, or second-generation survivor. She says children of survivors can react to their parents' anxiety and depression.
Being hypervigilant about all kinds of things all the time, a little suspicious, mistrustfulness, anxiety, a tendency to sort of depressive experiences.
This is called intergenerational trauma, which means a survivor was impacted so greatly their descendants also grapple with the effect of a traumatizing event. According to the American Psychological Association, people who experience intergenerational trauma may show emotional or behavioral patterns similar to the survivor, like shame, increased anxiety and guilt, low self-esteem, depression, even substance abuse, and difficulty creating relationships with others, and so much more. While intergenerational trauma was first identified among children of Holocaust survivors, it isn't specific to one culture. Take Brought Plenty, an Indigenous woman who says she remembers the moments federal U.S. officials forcibly took her from her grandparents and sent her to a boarding school designed to erase her language, culture, and beliefs.
She just grabbed my hair on one side of my braids and just cut it off and threw it right at me, and then went to the other side and cut it off.
She was just 6.5 years old and never saw her grandparents again. Now at age 70, Brought Plenty recalls how she was forced to forget her name, bathed in soap that smelled like lye, and suffered physical abuse at the hands of other students and staff. She says her daughter, Nila, now bears consequences of that trauma.
I can honestly say with my older children, I never hugged them. I never kissed them. I never told them I was proud of them.
Psychologist Fabiana Franco is among a chorus of researchers who say difficulty expressing love or emotions can affect a child's sense of worth, which they then pass on to their own children later in life. Nila's trauma manifests as guilt as she helps her mother find missing children who never came home from boarding school.
I have a breakdown at least once a month because, I'm reading all of these testimonies, and then I feel bad because I'm like, well, I should be able to read this if other people live through it. But at the same time, it's like, you can't carry hundreds of people's stories.
While researchers have widely documented the effects of intergenerational trauma, there's no conclusive finding about how it's passed. Researcher Yael Danieli believes survivors may struggle to form healthy bonds and emotional attachments to their children, which can create a cycle of avoidant and distrustful relationships. But one study by Dr. Rachel Yehuda at Mount Sinai Hospital found genetic changes to Holocaust survivors' descendants, specifically focused on the gene associated with stress hormones. This theory is known as epigenetic inheritance, the thought that environmental factors like stress or diet can affect your descendants' gene expression. In a 2008 lecture, Dr. Joy DeGruy called this effect in the Black community post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Hundreds of years of trauma, no treatment. Freed, more trauma, no treatment. What do you do the math? Do you think there may be residual impacts of that trauma? Of course there is. It didn't end, friends, and it hasn't ended yet.
DeGruy says Black Americans still feel the impact of slavery through elevated stress levels, affecting their body's immune system. She says there is also a sense of a foreshortened future, internalized racism, difficulty sleeping, and angry outbursts. DeGruy argues the trauma responses are so prevalent, others wrongly believe it's inherently part of the Black experience.
That's their culture. That's just the way they are. That's their culture. So there's poison in the cookies, right? But how are you going to tease out that poison?
To cut the intergenerational chain of trauma, therapists recommend being open about the extent of past issues and discussing the impact with loved ones. There are also different areas of professional help. Narrative exposure therapy helps patients reframe traumatic experiences to relinquish the control it plays in their lives. And the intergenerational trauma treatment model focuses on healing unresolved childhood trauma through different cognitive behavioral techniques. For Neela and Brought Plenty,
I know for myself that I have to step back in a way, as painful as that seems to me.
they're building trust and closeness through bringing justice to the Indigenous children who never made it home,
I want my daughter to live a good life.
breaking the cycle to heal the future. Alex Miller, Newsy.